The Taiping Rebellion, also known as the Taiping Civil War, Revolution, or Movement, was a civil war in China between the Qing dynasty and the Taiping Heavenly Kingdom movement. The conflict would last 14 years from its outbreak in 1850 till the fall of the Taiping-controlled Nanking, which they had renamed Heavenly Capital in 1864. During the conflict, the British government ended up supporting the Qing for stability purposes in China. The British built 8 ships, 7 gunships, and a support vessel, all of them which were steamers, with 40 heavy guns between them. Some were actually recommissioned rather than being built from scratch, and among them were the Pekin, China, and Amoy, as well as a paddle-wheel steamship, Kiangsu, which was, at the time, considered the fastest and most modern naval ship in the world. In Shanghai, the term for the fleet was known as the Vampire Fleet, as it was a Chinese fleet to be used against the Chinese themselves and sucked away many resources from the British Empire when they built it and crewed it. The fleet was led by Captain Shepard Osborne and was intended to modernize China's navy, but it was disbanded in late 1863 without a shot being fired due to command disputes between the Chinese and British, as well as a minor mutiny. You see, the British crew weren't really supportive of the idea of fighting for the Qing, and some proposed having the fleet defect to the Taiping rebels, but by far the most insane proposal was to have the fleet join the U.S. Civil War in support of the Confederates. Changes to occur in an alternate timeline so that the Vampire Fleet actually would get to join the Confederacy would be numerous. First, the crews of the fleet's ships would all have to agree with the plan. Second, and most importantly, the American ambassador in Shanghai can't catch wind of this, as in our timeline he immediately went to the British to convince them to sell the fleet, which they did before the crew could go and even consider joining the Confederacy. Navigating the Pacific Ocean is of course going to be the first major issue for the Vampire Fleet. Now, they're not going to have the most time to get a bunch of supplies that they need to cross an ocean while in Shanghai, because they're going to be hightailing it out of there as soon as possible to avoid the American ambassador to leave before the British government can sell the fleet. Also, throughout their journey crossing the Pacific, they need to raid a lot of supplies and maintain discipline in their new objective, and it's going to take a hot minute to cross an entire ocean. With that, the Vampire Fleet will also have to get to the Atlantic, and they planned on circumnavigating South America to do so. Now, after all that time crossing the Pacific, it's going to take even longer to circumnavigate South America, and since it's the 1860s, the dangers of doing so are also ever present. See, down at Tierra del Fuego, where the fleet's crossing, it's pretty darn cold, and the environment is pretty hostile for ships because, danger, ocean. And then there's no telling how various Latin American countries might react to the Vampire Fleet temporarily docking in their harbors and doing whatever they do on layovers at the time. Now, during the U.S. Civil War, the Union naval blockade stretched from the U.S. coast around Virginia through the Gulf of Mexico, and the blockade was successful in blocking 95% of cotton exports from the South compared to pre-war levels, devaluing its currency and severely damaging the South's economy. However, the blockade was less successful in preventing war materials from being smuggled to the South, as blockade runners were able to smuggle over 600,000 mostly British-made weapons to the South that prolonged the war by 2 years, so keep in mind the blockade isn't perfect. The U.S. Civil War, at the time of the Vampire Fleet's arrival in the U.S., will, in my opinion, be well into 1864, and the South's defeat is pretty much assured, but the Confederates are still fighting on and not going to make it so easy for the Union anytime soon. Anyway, the Vampire Fleet's gunships and steamers are going to go up against the Union blockade of steamers and ironclads. However, like I said before, a lot of blockade runners were able to get through, as the blockade was kind of there, but also the Vampire Fleet may not even have to engage the U.S. Navy, but they're probably gonna, in my opinion. An engagement between the Vampire Fleet and Union Navy would be hard to predict, as the British aren't involved in the U.S. Civil War, and this seeming sneak attack would be a diplomatic nightmare. Once the Vampire Fleet gets to the coast, though, and arrives, there's also not too much they can do for the Confederates because, well, the North's gonna win anyway, and the Confederate Navy was pretty non-existent. I'd say all that really happens is the British are in a pretty tricky spot, and perhaps more Union ships are gonna be sunk. That's just one possible scenario, and yeah, I know not much changed and this was kinda short, but that's alternate history for you. What do you think would have happened had the Vampire Fleet joined the U.S. Civil War? Write in the comments, and thank you for watching.